Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election. I'll be giving you all my first presidential election prediction following the debate. I waited a couple days to release this because it's always good to see how the polls start to move. It usually takes maybe 72 hours, maybe a bit more than that. And the debate was on Tuesday. It is Saturday morning, so to start out the weekend, we'll be talking about this electoral map. I'm going to begin by filling out the safe Democratic states as we always do, and these are going to remain mostly unchanged, I believe. Kamala Harris, in terms of the safe states, I don't think that much has changed over the course of the past few weeks since I last did this. So she's going to get 191 electoral votes that are going to be in the safe column for her. Donald Trump, it's going to be similar. We're going to see that he's going to get a bit less or fewer electoral votes, but not by too much. He's going to be at 113. And so now these states, to some degree, are going to be close, not necessarily competitive, but some of these states could be, I think all these states have a real chance of being within 10%, no matter what you believe is going to happen at the end of the day. So to start by filling out the safe, or the likely Democratic states, we're going to go to New Mexico, Nebraska 2nd District, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Maine at large, Virginia, and that, I believe, should do it. That's going to be 226 electoral votes for Kamala Harris. And I don't think any of these states are too debatable. The polls have moved towards Harris in some of these states, right? Like we take a look at the state of New Hampshire. Latest poll from St. Anselm had her up by 8. She was up by 7 last month. Minnesota, we've had a couple of close polls, but broadly, Harris's lead is pretty firm. It's a 6-point lead. So I don't really think any of these states are too competitive, and Harris should win them all by more than 5 points. Now, for Donald Trump, we're going to give him Alaska, Iowa, Ohio, South Carolina, all in the or in the likely column, as well as Maine's 2nd District. So Alaska is an interesting one because we did get a poll yesterday that had Trump only up by 5. And this is a good poll, so this is a local poll, and they actually in 2022 were very accurate. So it is a concern for Trump that he's only up by 5 here. He was also only matching his 2020 margin in a signal double GOP-sponsored poll. So, there have been some warning signs for Trump here, but I don't think he'll win it by any less than 5. This is kind of, to me, a worst-case scenario, and I bet in this poll you'll see some undecided voters kind of come home to Trump, and he'll probably win by 8 or 9 at the end of the day here. I think Iowa, Ohio, and South Carolina are pretty self-explanatory, as is Maine's 2nd District. We did get a poll last month that actually showed Harris winning the district, but in 2020, right, like, you have to remember, Maine polling has been very unreliable. In 2020, the polls were very, very wrong. They overestimated Democrats by a significant amount, and we actually saw in the 2nd District, Biden was up by 3 points on Election Day. He lost it by 6, so I wouldn't be a huge believer in the polls here, and in the one poll that had Harris ahead, they had her up by 17 statewide, and I don't think that's going to hold up either. I think she'll probably do maybe 8, 9 points worse across the board, and that would, even if you adjust the poll, it'd be kind of a 3 or 4 point loss for Harris in the district. I think she loses it by 6, maybe 7. So to me, this is a map that is pretty clearly leaning towards Donald Trump. Now you will notice that there is a new state in the truly competitive column, which is states that can be under 5%. And I don't think this state is really a state that could go either way, but it could be closer than we initially thought. And that state is, of course, Florida. Now, Florida, I've been pretty clear in my belief that this is going to be a Donald Trump state, and I haven't changed. Donald Trump will win Florida, and it won't be particularly close to win it by more than 2020 in all likelihood. But just to kind of represent what's going on at this point in time, we've seen movement towards Kamala Harris here, right? And in the recent polling we've gotten, she's been doing better. Morning Consult, which is a decent poll, they're a C-plus type of pollster, kind of 6 out of 10. They only have Trump up by 2. Emerson, he's up by less than 4. And then if we take a look at some of the other polls, right, like we've seen in GOP polls, Trump only being up by 7, which, a few months ago, I think Trump plus 7 would have been maybe a more conservative prediction on Florida. Now, I think we could be in a spot where Trump wins it by less. I will likely move this state back to likely Republican on Election Day, no pun intended. But right now, the polls show a somewhat close race, and there has been talk from Democrats but kind of starting to reinvest in Florida. I personally think that would be a bad strategy because they aren't really close to winning the state, but it could maybe narrow the margin a little bit. So to me, Florida right now put it in the lean, but we'll see how that holds up till Election Day. And no, I don't think the state is truly, in a position where it can, really be close to voting for Kamala Harris come November. So now we're going to go to another lean Republican state, and that is Texas. Texas is similar to Florida. I believe this state is going to narrow up, but it won't really be competitive, and Kamala Harris doesn't really have a real chance here. She's down by more in Texas than Florida, even though I do think she'll actually lose Texas by less. But right now, Morning Consult had Trump up by 8. Emerson only had him up by 3, which is a real big concern for him because in 2022, this is a nonpartisan B-plus rated pollster. In 2022, they actually underestimated Democrats, and they only had Trump up by 3 here. That's a concern for him. The good news, though, is that some of the other polls have Trump up by 5, or the good news for Trump, rather, excuse me. The good news for Trump is that he's up by 5 in these other polls. He's up by 9 in active vote, which isn't a great pollster, but it's worth something. And then in a poll that I like, which is the Hobby School, he's up by 5 as well. So the results kind of point to a mid-single-digit victory for Trump here. And again, just to kind of pull out the 2020 map, he won the state by 5.6% in 2020. I think it'll get about a point closer just because of trends in Dallas and Austin, which will help Democrats. Turnout could be a problem for them, but broadly, the suburbs are big enough where even if the state, if Democrats don't have a good year in terms of turnout, the suburbs can just push the state a bit to the left. So Donald Trump should win there. Now, to go over to a lean blue state, I believe Kamala Harris will likely win Michigan by 2, 3, maybe 3.5 points. If we take a look at the polling data, it's been pretty consistent. Harris is up by 2. It actually has narrowed up a little bit. If today's September 14th, if we go back to, say, August 14th, she was up by 3.5. So her lead has narrowed. But again, we've had an influx of Republican-aligned polls like Insider Advantage, coefficients and other GOP poll, Patriot polling, Signal, Trafalgar. So more, half of the polls we've gotten recently have been GOP-aligned polls, and a bunch of them still show Harris ahead, right? So that's, I'd take that with a grain of salt. The good news for her is that in Redfield, which does polls a lot, Harris is up by 3 in the most recent poll, and she was up by 3 in their poll before that, but I think she was actually losing before that. Let's see, Redfield, if we go back to their polls from earlier, yeah, she was losing by 1. She's now up by 3. So there's been some movement towards Harris in Michigan. I think just broadly, geographically, Democrats have an advantage here just because the Republicans, to win the state, they have to get a lot of things to go right for them. In 2016, when Trump won Michigan, he was winning Kent County, which voted for Biden by 6 in 2020. He was, he was losing by single digits in Oakland County. And in these two suburban counties, which cast well over, Kent County, Biden got 190,000 votes there. Oakland got 434,000 votes there. Right? These are big counties that have a real sway on the statewide vote. Democrats do better there every year. Republicans haven't been able to stem the bleeding. And Donald Trump might do well with working class voters in the state. Maybe he'll do a bit better in Macomb County. It won't be enough to counter everything else. I think just mathematically the numbers aren't there in Michigan for Trump. Even though maybe on a good night he could win it, it's more likely than not that he doesn't. And so that brings me to my next state, which I believe is North Carolina. We're now entering kind of toss-up territory where I believe North Carolina is the least close of the toss-ups right now. I'm going to give it to Trump by about 2%. And this might come as a surprise because North Carolina, we've been getting a lot of really bad polling for Donald Trump. But broadly, right, I wouldn't be too concerned about it if I were a Republican. Harris has surged here, right? She was down by a point a few weeks ago. She's now leading. But the problem for Harris is that she hasn't really cracked 50 in many polls. She got to 50% in one Quinnipiac poll. But again, if you look at the 2020 polls, right, just to show you, Biden was up by 2 points here on election day, and he lost the state by 1.3. And so the same polls that had Biden winning by 5-6 points in North Carolina, they show Harris up by 3, right? Like Quinnipiac. Morning Consult has it even, and they were pretty bullish on Democrats here last time. Survey USA is a legitimately good pollster, so I think this is a concern for Trump. But again, FAU has him up. He's up in Insider Advantage, which is a GOP-aligned poll, but I think they've actually been okay in North Carolina. So right now the polling does favor Harris. I will genuinely concede that. But I think Democrats haven't won here in 16 years. Geographically, the problem for them is that they don't do well enough in the state's suburbs, right? Cabarrus County north of Charlotte. You look at the areas kind of out, or even in Wake County where Democrats have been getting favorable trends recently. If they can get to 65 there, maybe they can win statewide, or if they can, stop losing by 10, 11,000 votes in Cabarrus, that'll help them. But the problem for them is that every year they come very close to winning North Carolina, and they always talk about it, but they can't actually do it. Uh, Hillary Clinton lost the state by 3. Barack Obama lost it by 2.5, I believe, when he ran for re-election in 2012. Biden lost by 1.3. And again, Biden led in most pre-election polling here. He was favored to win the state, according to a lot of people. So uh, Democrats definitely have a path here. But again, the problem for them is they haven't, is that they're like 90% of the way there in the suburbs, and the rural areas are likely to continue to trend towards Republicans, because we've seen, especially in the South, and even in areas where you have majority black counties, which are losing population, Democrats have major problems there. It's too many things are going on for Democrats to just see it, even a 2-point shift here. It's in play for Kamala Harris. It's definitely a competitive state. But again, I'm not going to believe on all those trends kind of coming in to favor Democrats just this year, right? Like, why would it happen this year when it hasn't happened in 16 years? Hasn't happened since 2008. And Democrats have had real chances. In 2020, they were supposed to win that Senate race. They lost it. In 2014, Hagan was a popular incumbent. She lost. And obviously, in 2020 as well, in the presidential race, Joe Biden was favored in most of the polls. So this is a state where Democrats have been burnt before. I'm not going to bet on them until I get really, really good evidence to bet on them. So now we're going to go to neighboring Georgia, where I believe you can make a similar case for Republicans not winning it. But the polling is pretty bad for Harris in Georgia right now. And, for the same reason that I'm narrowing Florida up, I'm going to keep Georgia in the Trump column, because right now, the polls are close. But if we take a look where we are, Trump still leads. And again, he's actually been doing better recently than he was 2 weeks ago. In Redfield and Wilton, he's up by 2. He's up by 3 in Quinnipiac, which, by the way, showed Harris up in North Carolina. So that's a problem for him, or for Harris in Georgia. Trump's down by 1 in Morning Consult in Georgia, which is a concern for him, but he's up in all the other polls like FAU. You also have to consider that the NYT Siena poll, which is one of my favorite pollsters, if we go back to what they actually had Donald Trump up by 4 points here in their likely voter undecided push. So, really, this is a very, very close state, and I would not be surprised at all if Kamala Harris comes back and wins it. In 2022, Herschel Walker was up on the election day polls, and he lost both the election day, a plurality of the election day vote, then the majority of the runoff vote. So again, this is Georgia. It has been good for Democrats in the past few cycles. I could totally see myself moving it back to the Harris column before election day. For now, though, it's a state where I do believe Donald Trump has the narrowest of advantages. Now we're going to go to Arizona. This is a state where I'm really bucking the polls and picking it for Kamala Harris. The polls have been very bad for her in the past 2 weeks. They were good for her like 2 weeks before, right? Like she was up by, a 1.5 for a good chunk of time, and now she's down by 1. And so the reason that the polls have been bad for her is mostly because we have been seeing like GOP-aligned pollsters kind of coming in and releasing polls, right? Like Patriot Polling Insider Advantage. Let's see. I think we got a Trafalgar. We got a Spry Strategies here too. Democratic polls haven't really like come in and balanced that out yet. But let's look at the nonpartisan polls. Tip Insights is a good poll. They have it a tied race. Morning Consult has Trump up by 2, which is a concern for Harris. Trump's up by 1 in Redfield. And then obviously CNN, this poll was very bad for Harris. Trump was up by 5. Emerson, Trump was up by 4. So recent polling has really shown movement towards Trump. But the good news is that the really top tier pollsters like Fox have Harris up by 1. She was up by 5 in New York Times Siena, which, I'm not going to quote New York Times Siena to say Trump's going to win Georgia right now and then not do the same thing for Arizona for Harris. And again, right, like the polling data in Arizona has been decent in recent years, but it's not, completely infallible. And in 2022, it underestimated Mark Kelly and Katie Hobbs, who ran for Senate and governor, by 3 points each, right? So this is clearly a state where Democrats have beat their polls, or they've been able to beat their polls, and they did it in 2018 and 2016 as well. So to me, I'm okay betting on it. If Trump's up by 2 on election day, I might move it back to him, but my priors are too strong here. We have to remember, and if you know the channel, you know what I'm about to say. Maricopa County, this is where 61% of all votes in Arizona are cast, and this county trended 5 points towards Joe Biden in 2020. If it even moves another 2 points towards Kamala Harris, again, this county moved. The Democrats in the Senate race did 4 points better than Biden here. So even if it moves half of that in 2024, and again, there is an abortion referendum on the ballot. It's going to be a very important issue in the state come November, right? This is a state where Democrats are going to benefit from that because this is broadly a pro-choice state. All that really makes me think that Trump's going to lose ground in Maricopa, not gain ground. And this, again, the majority of the votes come from this county. If Trump loses more ground there, he has to make up a lot of ground everywhere else. And in 2020, he lost ground in Pima just as much as he did in Coconino, just as much as he did in Maricopa. So to me, this state, there's a lot of things that need to go right for Trump to win it. He can come close, but I'd still bet on Harris to win it as of today, even though I know that might be a hot take right now. But we'll see. We'll see where we are on election day. Maybe people are going to come back and start to agree with me. Now, neighboring Nevada is kind of the opposite of Arizona, where the geography and I think the math favors Republicans, but the polls favor the Democrats. And so right now in the polls, not in Nebraska, in Nevada, Harris is up by 0.2. And that's a pretty good, I'd say that's a fine result for her, given the fact that in 2016, Trump was winning the state in the polls and he ended up losing it. And then in 2022 or in 2018, the polls had Republicans winning the Senate and governorship. They lost both those races. In 2022, the polls had Catherine Cortez Masto losing to Adam Laxalt by, I think, 3 or 4 on election day, and she ended up winning by just under a point. So I think Harris is polling wise in good shape here. Her problem is that, I'm a big numbers guy. You make the argument for her doing well in Maricopa County. Clark County, this is an even bigger share of the electorate. 3/4 of the votes in Nevada come from Clark County, and it moved 1.5 points to the right in 2020. And again, usually suburbs have been able to kind of save the Democrats in these big urban counties. It saved them in Maricopa, it saved them to an extent in Dallas and Austin, it saved them even in Jacksonville, Florida, where they had otherwise a very bad year in Florida. In Las Vegas, the suburbs did not come home for Joe Biden in 2020 the way he would have hoped. This state was closer than a lot of people thought. Democrats have gotten very lucky here in recent years. They've won a bunch of very close races. And it's definitely, to me, something that shouldn't be sustainable. I wouldn't be shocked if Harris wins it again, just because Republicans, again, haven't really won here in the past. Like, they haven't won a federal race in Nevada since 2012, and before that, they hadn't won a presidential race since 2004. So I could definitely see the case for Nevada staying blue. I don't hate it, but right now, the fact that Clark County is trending right, the fact that we could see another drop in Democratic turnout, which really will hurt the party, to me, that could be very, 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 very problematic for Kamala Harris. So it's going to come down to the Rust Belt. And obviously, right now, if I award Pennsylvania, it's going to decide the election. So we're going to hold off on Pennsylvania. We're going to talk about Wisconsin, where I believe Kamala Harris, for the first time, might be favored here. Now, this is obviously, Wisconsin state where I've been pretty bullish on Trump, but I don't want to ignore the polling data. And the polling data is pretty clear. Kamala Harris is expanding her lead. And in the aftermath of the debate, we've seen 2 very good polls for her. Redfield Wilton, she's up by 3. She's up by 3 in Morning Consult. She's tied in GOP poll. She's up by 2 in CBS. And best of all for Harris, in one of the best polls, this is a local Wisconsin pollster. It's the Marquette University Law School. They've been very good in recent years. She's up by 4 points. She's at 52% of the vote. I don't think she'll win by 4. I think she'll win by, if anything, like 0.4. But again, the best pollsters right now, they all show Harris winning. And again, Donald Trump, the last time he led a poll that wasn't a GOP poll was Emerson, and that was on August 28th. Before that, we had Trafalgar show him up by 1. But again, Trafalgar had Republicans winning the Senate race by, I think, 5 or 6 points in 2022. They had Trump. They were actually fine here in 2020, to be fair, but they were very bad in 2022. So again, it's a very close state. I think geographically, Trump might have an advantage here just in terms of the fact that Kamala Harris is going to need to hold on to some ground in the rural areas that kind of stayed stagnant in 2020, right? Because in these rural counties, like go to rural Texas and just look at the panhandle counties, right? Let's just go here. Click on any random one. Trump gets like 90% of the vote conservatively. You go to Wisconsin, you go to these rural counties that are, just as rural, and often even more white, right? Which is a Democrat that favors Republicans. These counties, Democrats still get 35 to 40% of the vote in. So Harris is going to have to hold on to those. And that could be a problem for her because we have seen slippage for Democrats here in recent years. They've also been slipping in the driftless working class areas. But the good news for Harris is that in Dane County, which is where roughly 11 or 12% of the votes could be cast as a share of the statewide total this year, it's zooming left. Biden did 5.5 points better than Hillary Clinton here. Tony Evers and Mandela Barnes, who in 2022 did very well here as well. And again, big college town, it'll be back in session, which will benefit Democrats. A very pro-choice area, very socially progressive area. Kamala Harris, if she can turn out young voters, this could, single-handedly keep Wisconsin blue. So Madison, look out for that on election night. I think Democrats are optimistic about their chances here because of Madison. And again, the polls do reflect a Democratic victory here, even though I think it could be smaller than people think. So Pennsylvania is the state it comes down to, as always. And right now, It's not election day, as I always say, but right now, if the election were held on September 14th, I see a narrow Harris advantage here. Now, I say that for mostly two reasons. As we always do, we're going to start with the polls here. And right now, Harris is up by about a point. And again, in the good nonpartisan poll, she does have an advantage. She's tied in Redfield, but she's up by 3 in Morning Consult. She's tied in YouGov CVS, which is a pretty good poll. So it just shows how close the race is. She's tied in WIC, which is a GOP poll. But again, the more nonpartisan polls like Emerson, they have it tied. And then she's up by 5 in Morning Consult. She was up by 2 in YouGov. And then obviously in the New York Times Siena poll from August, which is a little bit outdated, but one of the best pollsters, they had Harris up by 4. Quinnipiac had her up by 3. So she's definitely polling fine nonpartisan polls. There's the reason that this average is so skewed towards Republicans. She'd be up by 2 or 3 right now if it weren't for these GOP polls like Coefficient, Patriot Polling, Trafalgar, and WIC, which all had Dr. Oz winning the Senate race and had Trump winning the state in 2020, right? If they hadn't come in, we'd be talking about a different result right now for Kamala Harris. But obviously, that is not, where we are. So regardless, just to kind of recap here, right? Like the first reason is essentially that the polls, the nonpartisan ones, do still show her ahead by a good amount. And obviously, in 2020, Biden underperformed his polls by around 3 points. And if Harris did that, she'd probably lose the state, even if you adjust for nonpartisan polling. But again, in 2022, Democrats beat their polls, and Democrats broadly in Pennsylvania have good trends. So let's talk about that now. Now, Harris, I think, is going to struggle in the rural areas. Trump's going to get good turnout here. These voters are energized. And in 2022, in terms of margin, the Republicans really struggled in the rural counties, but in terms of turnout, they were fine broadly. So Trump should be able to get this turnout that he needs. Now, the problem for them is that in the metro areas like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, Republicans don't have any, really ground to gain. In Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, Biden did 4 points better than Hillary Clinton, and in the 2022 Senate race, Democrats got 60% of the vote here. Biden got 59.4. I think Harris will crack 60 there. And it's a left-running county. That'll be a huge problem for Trump because, again, you see, let's just do some brief math here, right? Like we see well over 700,000 votes being cast. So obviously, that's a huge county that plays a big role in deciding a state that's decided by like 80,000 votes every year. And then we go to the East Philadelphia Caller, Delaware, Chester, and Montgomery. These counties all moved to the left in 2020, especially Chester moved 8 points to the left. I think Harris, especially with this rising salience of abortion issues, right? Like we talk about her, I think her debate performance, which I talked about last video, I haven't really addressed it today, but it broadly did help her. The majority of voters do think she won the debate. And that performance, like if you watched it, it was particularly catered to moderate voters in the suburbs who maybe don't like necessarily the past progressive stances Harris has taken, but don't like Trump. They don't like what they perceive to be extremism. And Harris really hammered him on being extreme. She talked about turning the page. She talked about kind of creating a new generation of leadership because I think people are really sick of, I think both Trump and Biden, we see that in their approval ratings. But the good news for Harris is that she isn't Trump or Biden. She's Harris. So that'll be interesting to watch. But again, as it pertains to these suburbs, these are big parts of the state. They moved towards Democrats in 2020, and better yet for them, in 2022, Dr. Ross, I think, ran a better campaign for the suburbs than John Fetterman did, and he underperformed Trump in 2 of those 3 counties. And the one he outperformed, Chester, he did I think, like 0.3% better. So Philadelphia, Republicans have won here federally since 2016. Their state party, I think, is a lot less organized, the state Democratic Party. In a state where it's that close, every little thing matters, and right now Democrats, I think, just have a bit more to be excited about here than Republicans do. But again, that could change, and this whole map could change by the time we get to November. So let me know what you all want to see. Let me know which states you disagree with, of course, in this prediction. Maybe there's a state you want to talk about in the comment section. I'm happy to engage with productive comments. Like the channel, subscribe to the video. Wow, I mixed that up. As you can tell, I'm tired. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. You can become a member if you'd like, but only if you want to. It really does help me out, though, so if you're interested, do check it out. And yeah, I will hopefully see you all in the next one.